Hello, in this video we are going to go over the midpoint formula. So if you look at the top of this page, you see that we have the midpoint formula right here, and it's a little bit of a different formula because we kind of write it as a point instead of a kind of written out equation, maybe like the distance formula was. Now, similar to the distance formula, we have our two key points, x1, y1, and x2, y2. So we use this formula when we're given 2 points to endpoints of a segment for what we're going to look at today, and then we plug it into the midpoint formula to find what the midpoint is in between those two. There's other stuff you can do with this formula, but for this lesson we are just going to look at the two endpoints, and we're going to find the midpoint using the midpoint formula. So you can think about the midpoint formula as an average. When you average a bunch of values, you're going to add them all together and divide them by how many values you have. So that's why if you take a look at the actual formula, all right, I told you it was going to be written as a point, so that's why it makes sense that over here you have the x's and then over here you have a y's, because that's how we write a point, right? X comma y. So that's why we're going to take the x1 plus x2 and divide it by 2. We're basically taking the average of those x values, add them up, divide it by 2, because that's the number of x values we have. And you're going to do the same thing for y's, y1 plus y2, and divide it by 2. Just an average. So when you look at these problems in example 1, first thing we're going to do is we're going to label. We're going to label these points. So I'm going to name this first one naturally x1, y1. I'm going to name the second one x2, y2. And then we are going to plug this into our formula. So looking up above, we have, I'm going to make my giant point here. And so x1 plus x2 is going to give me a negative 5 plus 11 over 2. And then I have a 7 plus 3 over 2. So when I go through to simplify these, I'm going to do negative 5 plus 11, which gives me 6 over 2. And 7 plus 3 gives me 10 over 2. And then once you get to this step, this is where, if you can, we want to simplify this. Can I do 6 divided by 2? Yes, I can. That gives me a 3. Can I do 10 divided by 2? Yes, I can. That gives me a 5. There is my midpoint between the points negative 5, 7 and 11, 3. Okay, so some nice things about this as we kind of look at the other examples is obviously I've been just naming the first point x1, y1, the second point x2, y2. Remember, guys, that really doesn't matter, okay? I could switch those around and make the first one x2, y2, the second one x1, y1. It's not going to change anything in these problems here, okay? And then the other nice thing about midpoint formula is, because addition's commutative, okay, we can't really mess up kind of the order we do this in, okay? Whereas in distance formula, it is important, okay? The main important thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that you're adding the x's together, like negative 8 plus 5, and the y's together, so the 12 and the 4. If you move too quick, it's really easy to accidentally put like the points together, like add up negative 8 plus 12 and then 5 plus 4. So you really got to make sure you're putting the x's together, y's together. That's the main thing you got to watch for. Okay, so for this one, you get negative 3 over 2. And then 12 plus 4 gives us 16 over 2. And so when we go through and simplify this one, now negative 3 over 2, that's an odd number up top. So that's kind of a trick that I use is, if it's an even number, I'm dividing it by 2. That's going to divide nicely, kind of like what the right side one is going to be. Okay, 16 divided by 2 is 8. Okay, but if you have an odd number up top, okay, it kind of depends on the question and what they want you to answer. I usually always just leave it as my fraction, negative 3 halves. Or maybe you have problems where they want you to actually divide that out, where you can get a negative 1 0.5. Okay, so it's just kind of preference, maybe what's being asked, as to like how you're going to answer it, whether it's in a fraction or a decimal. Okay, so if we go to example 3 here, I have, this is my x1, y1, x2, y2, so going a little bit quicker, plugging into the formula, I'm going to add the x's, -7 plus -9. Now watch your signs, I'm adding up two negatives there, so we got to be careful with that. And then -16 plus -1. Oh, sorry, going a little slow here, divided by 2. And so when we add those up, we get -16 over 2. And over here we're going to get -17 over 2. So kind of following the same idea as last time. All right, I have a -8 when I divide that first part out, and then the second one's odd, so I could just leave this as -17 over 2. Okay, or if we are putting it in decimal form, that gives me -8 over -8.5. Okay, and those are our 3 examples there of using the midpoint formula. So for the last couple problems on this page, the main thing is that it gives you a picture and says find the midpoint of each line segment. So really the only extra thing that I'm going to do is I don't really want to like sit here and try to like guess, oh, I think the midpoint's around here. Instead, I can actually take the points. If I find that this top point is -1, 4. Why it's acting so slow. All right, and then when I use this point, 5, -5, okay, those are the 2 points that I can use, -1, 4, and 5, -5. So plugging this into midpoint formula, I'm going to kind of make my giant point, okay, and then I'm going to add the x's together. So remember, labeling takes an extra, 3 seconds? But I think can be really important to us. x1 plus x2 over 2. y1 plus y2 over 2. And when I simplify this down, that gives me 4 over 2, -1 over 2. So this final answer is going to be 2, -1/2. Oh, turn the pen back on. 2, -1/2. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to leave my answer as that. Remember, you can also leave it as -0.5 for that y value there. All right, so if we follow this strategy for all those, one thing I will say as I go back to this is you can always use it to check. Like when I go to the point 2, -1/2, that's about right there. Does that look like it's about in the middle of my 2 endpoints? Yeah. Okay. So you could also do that for the 3 problems that we did up top here. You would just have to either plot them on a graph. You could use Desmos. Okay. But it's always kind of nice and easy to check your answer and see if it makes sense by just plotting that point, especially when you already have the pictures like these. So, all right, I'll do that to check this at the end as well. But if I got the point 2, 4, and then the point, kind of same as last time, 5, -5. Okay, great. I'm going to do midpoint formula between 2, 4, and 5, -5. So we're going to make our big point. I'm going to do 2 plus 5 divided by 2. 4 plus -5 divided by 2. So that's going to give me a 7/2 and a -1/2. Now both those are kind of odd numbers there, so guess what? I can leave that as my answer. If you wanted to use decimals, this would be 3.5, comma, -0.5. And so same thing, if I go through and check this on my graph, so I just told you that this was 3.5 and -1/2, that's this point right here. And if I take a look, I feel really good about that answer. Okay, so to finish up the last two, maybe going a little bit quicker, we have the points -2, -1, watch your signs, and then the point 4, +5. So for -2, -1, and the point 4, 5, I'm going to make my big point. Okay, and then let's label this back out again, and I might have forgotten to do that on the last one, that's fine. Okay, -2 plus 4 over 2, x1 plus x2, and then y1, -1 plus y2, a 5 over 2. So -2 plus 4 is a 2 over 2, then -1 plus 5 is a 4 over 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. My midpoint is going to be 1, 2. And let's check it real quick. 1, 2. Sweet. That looks like it is in the middle between those two endpoints. And my last one, we have the point -4, -2. And then the point -1, 4. So looking at -4, -2, and -1, 4, I'm going to make my big point for my last problem. I have x1, y1, x2, y2. So I'm going to do -4 plus -1 over 2. And then I'm going to do -2 plus 4 over 2. This leaves me with a -5 over 2, a +2 over 2. So the -5 over 2 I can just leave as that, but then the 2 over 2 I can write as 1. So there's my midpoint there. Now -5 over 2 is the -2.5, so that's going to take me over there on the x-axis and then go up 1. That's that point right there. Sweet, I feel pretty good about that. So this is how you use midpoint formula when you are given two endpoints. In the first section, we just were given the endpoint kind of coordinates. So we plug those into our formula, and then the second section, we were actually given a picture. So I had to kind of label the two endpoints, and then I could plug that into the formula. Remember, it's just an average. I'm averaging the x values, averaging the y values of my two endpoints, and making kind of a big point. Thanks.